Malaysian tragedy is that most of Malaysians have lost sight, blinded, meaning lost vision of all that has happened leading up to May 9, 2018, the last general election which was the 14th since independence in 1957. When all things considered, we see how the general lot have been duped before and since.
And I think they want the end back.
Even a scandal-tainted leader, Najib Razak is enjoying a resurgence in his popularity.
If he managed to clear up his name, by all means, he is free to contest as an UMNO president.
It will be disastrous if Najib comes back because he is corrupt.
With the next Malaysian general election just around the corner, can Najib's increasing popularity bring about a resounding victory for UMNO and Barisan Nasional? Or will the scandal-tainted former PM cast a dark shadow over the party's political future? It was just 2 years ago when the UMNO General Assembly was seen as an unusually subdued affair. It lost some of its luster, prestige and grandeur. And that happened after the grand old party, Barisan Nasional, lost its grip on power in the May 2018 general election. But everything seems to have changed 4 years on. At the recently concluded annual General Assembly, the atmosphere was one of jubilation as party faithful converged at the party headquarters with a renewed sense of vigor and confidence. The ruling Perikatan Nasional coalition is now helmed by UMNO under the leadership of the party's Vice President Ismail Sabri Yaakob. He was appointed Prime Minister after Mr. Muhyiddin Yassin, leader of Bersatu, a component party within the ruling coalition, lost the majority support in Parliament. UMNO is also still basking in the glory from its recent back-to-back wins in Malacca and Johor state elections. And the party is now back to its formidable self and is now ready to fight in the next general election, not as part of the current Perikatan Nasional government, but as the leader of the Barisan Nasional coalition.
Yang perlu dilunaskan, artinya UMNO dan Barisan Nasional bangkit semula.
You can see from the mood during the UMNO General Assembly recently, the mood has been very strong in favor of early elections. There's strong confidence about the ability to win the election.
Renewed confidence is a stark contrast to the situation within the party back in May 2018. That was when the opposition coalition, Pakatan Harapan, unexpectedly deposed the ruling BN government which had ruled the country uninterruptedly for 61 years. Shahrial Samad has been an MP for Johor Bahru since 1978. The veteran UMNO politician was one of the casualties in the 2018 elections. The state of Johor, which is the birthplace of UMNO, was once seen as BN's formidable fortress. But it was breached in May 2018 when the state fell to the opposition for the first time in the country's history.
So we went into the GE14 with confidence, right? It was only much later as you go through the campaign period when the issues that came up and were brought up by the opposition candidates, we found that not that we could not answer the issues, but nobody was listening. You know, that's what we found. You know, that people were not willing to listen anymore.
The long-time MP was referring to the multi-billion-dollar scandal surrounding the state investment vehicle One Malaysia Development Berhad, or 1MDB, that involved then Prime Minister Najib Razak. It was reported in 2015 that about $700 million was allegedly stolen from 1MDB and made its way into Najib's personal bank accounts. Mr. Najib, however, denied the allegation, saying the money was a gift by the Saudi royal family. To make things worse, the Barisan Nasional government introduced the Goods and Services Tax in 2015. This move proved to be highly unpopular among Malaysians, and the opposition alliance of Pakatan Harapan used both of these issues as an effective cannon fodder for their own campaign against the ruling government.
Whatever argument you put forward, I sense that there was no acceptance for these ideas, for these arguments. Nobody was listening. Nobody wanted to listen. So it was only towards the middle part of the campaign that you realize, and towards the end of that, that we were probably going to suffer badly in the polls in GE14.
But there was another big factor that worked in the opposition's favor.
Najib, if he had called the elections early in 2017 after the SEA Games, I think BN would have still won. Why? Because the opposition wasn't organized at the time. There was no PH formed formally at the time. Mahathir wasn't their leader. So I think many of us thought that we could have won the election. The problem came when Najib delayed the election until to the end. So we were up against a united opposition with Mahathir as its leader.
He was referring to former Prime Minister Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, Malaysia's longest-serving leader. He felt betrayed by Mr. Najib over the corruption allegations and returned to the political fray with a view of toppling his former protégé, Mr. Najib, from power.
When Najib took over, after a short while, I found that he was very corrupt. He set up this 1MDB, borrowed 42 billion ringgit, and then the money was wrongly used. So at that stage, I decided also again to leave UMNO, which I had rejoined during his time. I decided to leave UMNO and to campaign against him.
With the help of other opposition parties, including PKR, DAP, and Amanah, Pakatan Harapan was able to mount a serious challenge against the mighty Barisan Nasional in the 14th general election and won. On 10th May 2018, Dr. Mahathir was sworn in as Prime Minister for the second time.
So he held very high regard by many Malaysians at that point in time, and he brought some trust to the opposition coalition, because I think there are some segments of society, particularly Malay society, that don't trust the opposition enough. And at that point in time, Anwar was in jail, so the opposition didn't have any other major leaders to champion their cause. So he, I think, played an important role in bridging the gap between having what they have and attaining victory.
Despite the convincing mandate from the Malaysian public, the government didn't last long. It collapsed 2 years later and was replaced by a Perikatan Nasional coalition led by Mr. Muhyiddin Yassin. Apart from Bersatu and the Islamic Party, BAS, UMNO has now returned to power. But how did it happen? How is a graft-tainted party able to make a political comeback? May 9th, 2018 was a historic moment for many Malaysians. That was when Barisan Nasional was voted out of power for the first time in over 60 years. Najib Razak also stepped down from his post as president of UMNO and head of the coalition in the wake of the election defeat. For the first few months in office, it appeared that the newly installed government was moving in the right direction. It got into business straight away to achieve its vision of a new Malaysia. One that's built on promises of lower cost of living, multiracial diversity, and zero tolerance for corruption.
Amongst them, of course, were to ensure that the scandals of 1MDB would not be repeated. some of the proposals that we made, such as abolishing the toll for the North-South Highway. We had already taken the first step by reducing the toll by 18% and freezing any future increases. If we had the full 5 years, I'm certain that we would have been able to deliver on abolishing the North-South Highway toll. At the same time, we were able to restructure many of the bloated contracts given to cronies. We revised many of the pricing, those pricing contracts, resulting in savings of more than 50 billion ringgit.
We began the process of getting back the money from 1MDB and bringing certain individuals to court. At the same time, working with various other countries and organizations and other institutions in other jurisdictions to make sure that these monies are repatriated, brought back, and those who are responsible are brought to court.
But over time, the PH government was struggling to fulfill many of the 60 promises it made in its election manifesto. Among others, it failed to set up a Royal Commission of Inquiry on 1MDB. Pakatan Harapan also failed to postpone the repayment of student loans or PTPTN for all graduates whose salaries are below 4,000 ringgit or around $900 per month, just to name a few.
We made promises in the manifesto, not realizing that some of the promises cannot be implemented because they require a two-thirds majority in the constitution. So although we wanted to do, we could not. For example, we wanted to have the Prime Minister serve for only 2 terms. That is something that involves the constitution, so we couldn't do that. We wanted to abolish capital punishment, but again, that is in the constitution and needs a 2/3 majority, so we couldn't do that.
UMNO was quick in exploiting PH's glaring weaknesses and was able to turn the tide in its favor. The government's decision to adopt the International Convention to Eliminate All Forms of Racial Discrimination, or ICERD, provided a chance for UMNO to hit back at PH. Together with PAS, they spearheaded massive street protests to exert pressure on PH not to ratify it, claiming that the move would jeopardize the status of Islam and the special position of the Malays. And PH was left with no other choice but to abandon its plan or risk losing the Malay support.
Perhaps it wasn't so well planned or well carried out that it allowed the opponents, the opposition, to galvanize support and lobby the Malay rulers to lend voice and support, and that pressured the PH government to back down on this thing. So all of this created a negative momentum on their part and put them on the back foot.
According to a nationwide survey conducted 1 year after Pakatan came to power, nearly 60% of Malays were unhappy with the performance of the Pakatan Harapan government. To make matters worse, PH lost several back-to-back by-elections, including Semenyih, Cameron Highlands, Rantau, Tanjung Piai, and Kimanis. It was against this political backdrop that Dr. Mahathir's right-hand man in Bersatu, Muhyiddin Yassin, defected, together with more than 30 MPs from Bersatu, including PKR Deputy President at that time, Azmin Ali. He then formed an alliance with his political nemesis, UMNO, and the Islamic Party, PAS. It was known as Perikatan Nasional. Dr. Mahathir then unexpectedly resigned from his post as Prime Minister. And that led to the collapse of the Pakatan Harapan government. On February 24, 2020, Muhyiddin was appointed as the new Prime Minister.
I think UMNO played a very critical role in...
There was this move within Bersatu to leave Pakatan Harapan. And because of that, I was opposed to that. I thought that we should not leave Pakatan Harapan because Pakatan Harapan was chosen by the people. But Muhyiddin and his supporters decided to withdraw from PH. When they withdrew from PH, together with Azmin, PH lost the majority. And therefore it should collapse.
The betrayal of our own elected representatives played a major part. But UMNO definitely contributed because they partake and participated in the overthrowing a constitutionally elected government.
DAP member Nur Miswari Ramli admits the fall of the PH government in 2020 had affected him personally. He was then a political secretary to one of PH's ministers and had high hopes for the alliance to work. His hopes began to fade as he saw the events that unfolded within the coalition as well as persistent attacks from UMNO.
To be honest, I'm very upset because what happened between internal politicians among Pakatan Harapan that time. I realized that maybe they're not really essentially sincere to be part of our reform system that we fight for and struggle before this. So what happened in Langkah Sheraton might collapse our Kerajaan Pakatan Harapan, I think somehow give us opportunity to see which area, which politician, which party is actually be with us from the beginning and to the end.
But some quarters had blamed Dr. Mahathir for not handing the premiership to Anwar as he had promised. And this led to the serious infighting within the coalition.
Mahathir promised to give the prime ministership to Anwar, and he didn't do that, and this is something which I think many people will also not forget. Mahathir can give any excuse, but he should have honored that promise.
Yeah, the promise made was that I should hand over the premiership to Anwar Ibrahim, but no specific period was mentioned. So I was willing to hand over to him, but there were lots of things that I needed to do, and it would take a little bit of time. So I thought that I will finish those tasks first and then hand it over to Ibrahim.
Dr. Mahathir, who will turn 97 this year, has previously blamed Muhyiddin for the downfall of the PH government. Today, the former Prime Minister has accused NAJIB of orchestrating the defection of PH lawmakers.
Yes, there is definitely a role played by NAJIB, very crucial role, because when he realized he had lost, he wanted to avoid that by working with PAS to form what he calls a Malay-Muslim government. And he did this by persuading members of Bersatu to cross over and support him.
Despite NAJIB's tainted image, Dr. Mahathir admits that this former protege has surprised everyone by appearing to bounce back from his misfortunes. NAJIB has amassed a huge following amid the rise of UMNO in recent months. In November last year, NAJIB helped his party UMNO win handsomely in the Malacca state election. He has also been credited for being one of the poll factors in Barisan Nasional's incredible win in the Johor state elections 2 months ago.
Well, I was very surprised. I thought that everybody would be against him, would not want him to be the Prime Minister.
Just 4 years ago, the political future of Malaysia's former Prime Minister Najib Razak appeared to be as good as over. he led UMNO and Barisan Nasional to a historic defeat in 2018, the first Prime Minister ever to lose a general election in 60 years. He was later found guilty of corruption and was sentenced to 12 years in prison and a $50 million fine. It was in connection with a multi-billion-dollar money laundering scandal involving State Investment Fund 1MDB. But yet, in spite of his conviction and sentence, he has lost none of his political stardom. Today, the disgraced former Prime Minister seems to be enjoying a resurgence in his popularity, and his fortunes are certainly looking up. He has carved for himself a moniker, Bosku, or My Boss, a slick social media campaign that helps rebrand his image. From an aristocratic elite, he has now become the voice of everyday Malaysians, a champion of the poor. The charm offensive has successfully elevated him almost to the status of a folk hero, especially among his supporters. What's there to be ashamed of, My Boss had even drowned the previous Pakatan Harapan government's attempt to destroy his reputation over a swathe of corruption allegations.
This is something that has to be corrected. How do we measure Najib Razak's popularity? Do we simply look at online responses? But if you look at online responses, it may be true that there is a significant support for the former Prime Minister Najib Razak. But again, we also see in the social media space that there are groups that are still favouring other of Najib Razak's opponents. So we see social media is a space where we see a lot of this being played out. And again, it's very difficult to pinpoint the level of support based on sentiments online.
Believe in the goodness of Malaysian people, they still detest corruption. And they would not support any leader who has been convicted. And at the same time, internationally, I think, condemned, has been part of the greatest financial scandal in history.
But almost 7 years have passed since the Wall Street Journal first reported that some 700 million of 1MDB money went into Najib's personal bank account. It then evolved into one of the world's biggest financial scandals, sparking embezzlement and money laundering investigations in at least 10 countries. But since then, Najib has been walking around a free man in spite of his conviction. And his fan base remains as strong as ever, even though he now holds no leadership position in UMNO.
And this idea was absurd, that if you've done wrong things, people should not support you. But there were so many fanatical followers of UMNO that they still supported him.
Political conspiracy aside, the fact is, Najib has not allowed his conviction to affect him. He has denied all the allegations leveled against him and is now fighting hard to set aside his conviction and sentence to help ensure his political survival. He even has not ruled out seeking re-election if an election is called within the next 2 years. And that has prompted many of his ardent critics, including Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, to conclude that Najib still has an ambition to be a Prime Minister for the second time.
And Najib is very active in campaigning for UMNO. And actually, BN won, partly because of the support for Najib. If in the 15th election, the BN were to win, and Najib would seek to be pardoned. If he is pardoned, then he will come back. He wants to be Prime Minister again. It would be disastrous. In my view, it would be disastrous if Najib comes back because he is corrupt.
If the guilty verdict is upheld by the federal court, Najib would be disqualified from serving as a member of parliament. He also would not be allowed to stand for elections.
So
After the Court of Appeal ruling, he's automatically banned for 5 years. So even if he goes to the Supreme Court, he's still banned from contesting for 5 years. And then if the Supreme Court agrees with the decision of the appeals court, then his conviction is upheld. So he can't contest anyway. And also can't contest as party president anyway.
So I think there is a general expectation based on the evidence that has been produced so far, and that he is complicit in it. So I think general expectation is there. If it's overturned, then I think a lot of people are going to be very, very upset. The majority of voters, would expect that the conviction will not be overturned, will be upheld. And the reason is because the evidence that has been put across has been pretty convincing.
The party does acknowledge that he has the ideas and the answers and the experience, right, to answer and to solve many of the issues. Right? And I think compared to all those personalities that you have now, whether it comes from the opposition or from the ruling party, I think he's still head and shoulders above the rest, isn't it?
UMNO Presidents Ahmad Zahid Hamidi and Najib are among those who have been pushing for an early election. They're also known as the court cluster, prominent leaders who are either on trial or have been convicted on charges such as criminal breach of trust, abuse of power, and money laundering. They have seen a momentum of support by the people for UMNO and BN and want to seize on it at a time when the opposition is still weak and fairly divided. But there are also those from within the party who do not see the need to rush into calling for an early election. Delaying the election would allow Prime Minister Ismail Sabri time to solidify his position, thereby giving him the chance to run for president at the next party polls.
Based on what I understand, I think UMNO is of two minds. One group, favors early elections because the opposition is in disarray. They're not united. They're not cooperating with one another. So strike it while it's still hot. Another train of thought is, I think the Prime Minister would like to stay on until the full term so that at least he can implement some of his ideas. That too is another contesting idea. So,
experts believe many Malaysians are turning to UMNO and Barisan Nasional now because they've grown disillusioned over the constant political bickering and power struggle involving top leaders of the various political parties. And that led to the change of prime ministers 3 times within a span of just 2 years. The track record of the opposition parties is not something to shout about. In 2018, PKR, Bersatu, Amanah, and DAP came together under a single political umbrella headed by Dr. Mahathir Mohamad. Today, the party is deeply divided. Dr. Mahathir has ceased to be the leader of Pakatan Harapan due to differences with leader of the opposition coalition, Anwar Ibrahim. Other than Muhyiddin Yassin, who defected, along with 31 members of Bersatu, he has also blamed Anwar for Pakatan's downfall.
Well, Anwar, as you know, has lost support from half of his party. So Anwar is a problem because he wants to be Prime Minister. He even goes so far as to announce that he had strong support and all that. But in the end, he was not supported strongly enough to become Prime Minister. But again, even now, any coalition involving Anwar must name him as Prime Minister, as potential. And this, if they do, they are bound to lose.
What happened in Malacca and Johor is not really a true indicator of UMNO and Barisan National revival because first and foremost, in terms of voter turnout, it's very low. And I think we must understand that this happens in mid-term. that some Malaysians would think that, we rather have continuity before the next elections, which might happen within the year or so. So we can sense that there might be some frustrations amongst the Malaysian electorate. If you look at the percentage of votes that UMNO and Barisan Nasional received, there's no significant increase. What happened was that the opposition votes actually fell. So that's one indicator that explains that we should not be over simplistic to say that UMNO and Barisan Nasional is on its way up.
I say we live in the goodness of Malaysians. Otherwise 2018 would not happen. Now whether we can make that, or repeat that, or make that happen once again, of course it's a very big question mark, as you have said. But the possibility is still there. You must not lose hope.
No matter who schemed, we saw the actions, right from the time of Malay Dignity meet in late November 2019. We saw all moves by Mahathir, who actively participated and blew smoke into each other's backsides. It was in fact an anti-ISERD, ultra-racist show. He was dancing with UMNO and PAS. And so was he, Mahathir, until such time he submitted his resignation in 2020 last week of February in retaliation to pressures to hand over premiership to Anwar and what else he was pissed off with. Let no one forget COVID was already picking up the spread. He knows he was being a baby. He miscalculated, a signature of being extremely old and stubborn. Mahathir was not being the bigger man there. He could have dissolved the cabinet and regrouped, but never should have resigned. Based on his resignation, he was throwing away the GE14 people's mandate. He should have continued as caretaker. At the very least, Mahathir, the Maha-Nazi, was the spoiler. It was he who threw away the GE mandate. It does not matter. The old man lost his skills. He was not being shrewd there. I would say he simply wasted it. As for me, I am not going to bother no more. Not direct participation, at least, no. Not until we see a viable way to fix it. For that we need to see all youngsters take control, regardless of party. No one above the age of 55 should even run for elected office. Just a suggestion.